So, as consultants, you often talk about how you have never seen someone that was held back because they were too emotionally intelligent. But you have seen many leaders fail or not reach their full potential because they couldn't relate well to others. So, this is often referred to as emotional intelligence or EQ. How would you define it?
So, great question. Emotional intelligence, in my opinion, is the ability to sense, understand, and effectively apply both power and acumen to emotions that help facilitate the way I would describe it this way as higher levels of collaboration and productivity. Here's the great thing. Emotional intelligence can actually be grown, it can be strengthened, and it can be improved. I was working with a leader 2 years ago. We did the TTI assessment. The final piece of that is the emotional intelligence summary. And there was one particular aspect of his emotional intelligence that was really low. It was so low that when he looked at it, it brought him to tears. And I said, "We're actually in the best position you could be." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "The good news is now you know. Like, it's no longer a blind spot for you because other people knew it." That's why I was coaching him. Other people knew that that aspect of emotional intelligence was a blind spot, and now he could work on it. Here's the great news. 2 years later, it's not perfect, but he has certainly made great strides when it comes to emotional intelligence. So maybe for some of you, around this idea of how to sense, understand, and effectively apply the power and acumen of emotion to facilitate collaboration and productivity, how have you seen that personally?
Well, I can say in working with another young leader who self-described as just, "I'm the most unintelligent, emotionally driven person you'll ever meet." He's come a long way because we began practicing taking the temperature of his experience when he was in situations. Just take that 10 seconds and say, "Where am I emotionally?" Just began to practice that tool. Then he began to write down some of those emotions. He's evolved over the last year into someone who can actually catch himself, talk about it. He can not only read the room, but he can actually start to impact the room and impact others.
You know, one of the things I've used, Paul, that kind of is related to that, but it takes it to a little bit different angle. And that is, I sometimes have coached leaders who are working on emotional intelligence issues to identify people to be sensors. You know, they say the average car has, 1,500 to 1,700 different, circuits and sensors in it. We sometimes need sensors. I may not know when I'm doing something. In fact, the likelihood is I won't know. And so if I'm in a meeting and I ask Billy, "Hey, Billy, I want you to be a sensor for me. Keep an eye on things, maybe sometimes give me a cue or at least debrief with me after a meeting." Dave and I, we've done consulting for almost 20 years now. How many times leaving a client have we done an after action discussion about how we did in our interactions with them? So sensors can really help. In addition to the person being a sensor, having some sensors that are outside of them.
I like to divide this into self-awareness and self-control, and then social awareness and social control. So I think it gets back to your definition, Billy, but how well am I aware of my own emotions, as you referred to, Paul, and then how can I control those emotions? And how well am I reading the room and then trying to influence the emotions of the room? And it is such a critical success factor for leaders. And some of the ways that I coach leaders that need to grow in this area is similar. Maybe you need to have somebody give you feedback on that idea before you share it. And then after you share it, have them give you feedback again. Did that come out the way I meant it to come out? Because sometimes we have unintended consequences by the tone or the body language or something we had no idea that was the way it was impacting the room. So having those sensors that you talked about, Jay, beforehand that can give us advice as we bounce ideas off of them, and then after the fact, give us the feedback can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think there is a sequence to that, right? So I often say with clients, it's like a mask. Anywhere you look, you're looking through the lens of awareness. And if your self-awareness is high, you get to pull back that lens, make some corrections to that. Now you're able to more clearly see what others need. If you're looking at others, what they need, without looking at yourself, That may be the definition of hypocrisy, right? And they see through that. The most compelling thing we can do is show we're willing to take an honest look, make those corrections. So we sometimes call that the Zorro effect, right? You have to have that self-awareness, self-regulation. Then you involve yourself in helping others, and then you move towards helping them grow that intelligence and perform at a higher level, not for you, but for them, right? But you can't do that as long as you're blinded or filtered by your own lack of awareness.
You know, we talk about self-regulation and self-control. Those things can also become obstacles. So I found in working with leaders, once you get to that level of self-awareness, it's not just that you're controlling those emotions, it's actually you're learning to use them well. And part of that learning to use them well is to express them in ways that not only are meaningful to me, but meaningful to the other person. That's that social awareness comes in, but that's a tool that someone can practice and be taught, because if all I'm doing is controlling, I'm just hanging on to that thing, guess what? It leaks out in other ways, and it comes out sideways. But if I can identify it and then practice good ways of expressing that, it actually builds the relational connection and the credibility and trust within our relationship.
Yeah, and the self-awareness, self-regulation piece is really kind of like looking in the mirror. And then developing strategies. We've written a number of blogs and articles that tie into this, but I was working with a leader who just, quite frankly, talked too much and didn't recognize that when he was around the table, he was talking 60, 70% of the time. Some of it was fear, and some of it was he felt like he was the only one that could drive. So I put like 3 chips in his pocket. I said, you get 3 chances to speak. And it was such a practical way for him to cultivate self-awareness that then allowed him to cultivate self-regulation. Because if you don't get that, you're probably not influencing the people you're leading as well.
Well, thanks for giving me 8 chips, Billy. I appreciate that. It's very, very kind of you. As we kind of think through this EQ element, and we all know it's important. Again, you could almost talk incessantly about emotional intelligence because we're seeing it everywhere. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book years ago, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's a really good book because, we have to remember that technical competency is still important, right? Like I could have the best EQ, but if I'm a surgeon, if I'm an engineer, I still have to be able to do that and do it well, or there could be a lot of consequences. And so it's that issue of how do I make sure I stay proficient in my discipline while also building that other element of leadership, and that is emotional intelligence.